7-7. The Star. Luster's lower lip curled in disgust as the Draconequus slipped from the chandelier and floated to the floor, landing on all fours like a grotesque mockery of a cat. Righting himself, he gazed down at Luster with an unreadable expression, before finally breaking out into his trademark grin. Luster snarled and lit her horn.
Give me one reason why I shouldn't blast you into pieces right here. Oh, such a temper. I see your little sabbatical in the Griffinlands hasn't mellowed you in the slightest. Don't you recall what happened the last time you and I went toe-to-toe? I've been practicing.
Luster spat.
Everything that's happened, it's all your fault. Where have you been? Hiding in a mountain, twiddling your thumbs? Please. Thumbs. We both know I only have the one thumb to twiddle.
Discord sighed, looking unusually despondent.
You and I both know you wouldn't last 3 seconds against me. If I were here to finish you off, I could have stopped your heart whenever I pleased. Believe me, I have no interest in petty score settling. Then what do you want?
Luster didn't take her eyes off the Draconequus for a second, but her horn slowly went out.
Come to trash both of our lives some more. In case you hadn't realized, the world is going to Tartarus, and not because of Cozy. Because of you. Well, I'm not so sure about that. After all, I didn't exactly send you after Princess Twilight. You knew I would have done anything to rescue Cozy?
Luster yelled, horn blazing once more, feeling more outraged than insulted.
I don't. How can you accuse me of? Are you saying I wanted any of this? Not at all. And yet, here we are, the path paved with your good intentions.
Discord waved his claw dismissively.
It doesn't matter anymore. I'm not here to catch up or swap fond memories. I'm here because Equestria needs us. The world needs us. What do you mean, needs us?
Luster muttered, eyeing Discord with suspicion.
You can do whatever you want. A popular belief, one that many are taken to believing, including princesses and emperors alike. But unfortunately, nothing more than a myth. Oh, don't look at me like that. I have power beyond measure, of course, but when it comes to the fine print, I cannot pull the strings of fate so precisely. A creature of chaos must work with his element.
That was one of the first things Luster could recall hearing from Discord that made a modicum of sense.
So why me? Believe me, you weren't my first choice. But my options are somewhat limited. Princess Twilight is gone. Gallus despises me, and is holding my most prized treasure hostage. The Griffin Emperor has always refused to talk with me, and Princess Flurry Heart is too preoccupied to be of any assistance. And what is it you want?
Discord sighed again, as if explaining himself to a simpleton.
I want to bring this war to an end, before it can irreversibly tear this world to shreds. You don't need a crystal ball to see which way the wind is blowing. Both sides have everything to lose, and everything to gain. If nothing is done, before long, peace will become little more than a hopeful memory. Even if Gallus were to be vanquished, the circumstances that made him will soon sweep an identical successor into power. Stop stalling.
Luster snapped, glancing over her shoulder.
Get to the point and then leave me alone. With pleasure.
Discord snarled.
There remains one last hope for peace. An enforced peace, but peace nonetheless.
He paused, clearly hoping to give the room an air of suspense.
The bewitching bell. I hid it in the summit of Mount Everhoof, in case I should ever need its magic again. Imbued within it is an ancient magic that belonged to Grogar. So go take it. Did you listen to a word I just said? I cannot use the magic with the required precision. I need a pony of unquestionable character and unyielding loyalty, one whom I can trust with this magic. As much as it pains me to admit this, I need you.
Luster paused, unnerved. This must be some kind of trick.
I thought you didn't trust me? I have my reservations about your judgment, but I do believe you have the countenance to do what's right. But there has to be somebody else. Some creature. Elsid. No. I need some creature with both the ability to control the magic and the character to not abuse it. Once the magic is within your grasp, you can use it to end this conflict, and, hopefully, not tear me to shreds.
Discord flashed her a wry grin.
Well?
Luster slowly shook her head, not sure how to respond.
Prove it. Bring me the bell. It will take me some time to recover the bell. There are powerful enchantments upon it that were never meant to be broken, and will be unpleasant to decipher. I learned my lesson last time. You, too, will need training. It could be several weeks before you are ready. I won't have time. I don't know if you heard, but I'm being shipped overseas tomorrow.
Assuming I can't find a way out of it.
Oh, I know. The training I talk of is nothing like what you imagine. I assure you. We can talk about it later. In the meanwhile, I have a bell to recover. But I need your word.
Luster sighed.
Fine in. I'll help you. And I need you to promise you'll return the magic when you're done. Of course I will. Will. What? What?
Luster groaned.
I promise I'll return it. The magic? When I'm done. I wouldn't believe it if I heard it from any pony else. But I believe you. Please understand, this is not a decision I take lightly. I don't doubt it.
Luster sneered.
What should I do when I have the magic? Just murder any pony who doesn't lay down their arms. If that's the price of peace, there is no right way of going about it. You will be free to reshape Equestria as you see fit. The magic will not render you invulnerable, but they should amplify your abilities to those beyond any creature I have ever known. There will be little change you cannot effect.
Luster took a moment to digest this.
Princess Flurry Heart was Princess Twilight's niece. She should sit on the throne. If that's your decision.
Discord tried to sound flat, but Luster heard the approval in his voice. It sickened her.
I'll make my decisions later.
Luster sighed.
I need to get home and pack. I don't want to think about how Cozy's going to take it.
Cozy had been pacing up and down furiously when Luster, which caused her to jump a foot in the air, causing Luster herself to stumble and almost fall face first.
Cozy, are you okay? Yeah. You're home early, that's all. How come?
Luster groaned, slamming the door behind her.
I have bad news.
Dropping her saddlebags, she collapsed onto the nearest sofa and gestured for Cozy to sit opposite her. She took a moment to consider the filly in front of her, and how best to break the news.
Listen, I don't want to, but I'm going to have to leave. Maybe for a few weeks, maybe longer. What?
The dismay in the filly's voice was awful, and Luster could feel her stomach flip as Cozy began to whimper.
Where? Why? To Equestria. I don't know if you've been listening to the radio, but there's a war. They want me over there, just for a little bit. Then I can come back. You said, weeks. That's not a little bit.
Luster crossed her hooves over her eyes.
Cozy, I promise you I'll be back the first chance I get. You can look after yourself, or you can stay with Yasha and Eula for a bit. I'm not staying here. I'm going with you.
The corner of Luster's mouth twitched upwards despite her. She always fought herself not to admire Cozy's stubbornness.
Not happening. It's not safe for a little filly over there. Oh, please. Like it was safe for me to live on the streets of Griffinstone for a month. Like it was safe for me to wander around Canterlot by myself. If you're so worried about me being safe, why don't you just turn me back into a statue and put me in the attic while you're gone?
Luster opened her mouth, but before she could respond, Cozy leaped to her hooves and continued shouting.
You and me both gave up everything so we could be together again, and now you've got me back. It's like you don't want me to do anything but stay locked up in this apartment. I'm not going to live forever. Luster, for Tartarus's sake, I almost died making it this far. Which is exactly why you need to stay somewhere safe. No, either I'm going with you, or I'm not here when you get back.
Luster raised an eyebrow.
There's just no talking you down, is there? Not a chance.
Cozy's furious gaze broke into a grin.
You know, that statue idea is seriously tempting me. If I wasn't such a good mom, I might have just tried it.
The words slipped out before she even knew what she'd said, and Luster found herself suppressing a sudden urge to clap a hoof to her mouth, as though it might take back some of what she'd said. Cozy merely blinked, looking more surprised than shocked.
I didn't mean to. It's fine.
Cozy looked down at the floor, voice low and quiet.
I meant it. I'm going with you. No matter what. I know. I'm not going to argue with you.
For the first time, Luster caught sight of the dark patches encircling Cozy's eyes.
Sheesh, you look tired. Did you get any sleep last night? Huh. Not a lot.
Cozy rubbed her eyes.
I might. You know. Get an early night. Sure. Good night, Cozy.
Luster watched the filly disappear into her room, unable to hear the two cackling voices whispering in her ear. The final Legionnaire screamed as he was forced from the fortress tower, his final roar cut short by his impact with the ground. Morningstar strode into the courtyard of the captured defense, a satisfied smile on his face. The air was thick with the sick smell of blood, none of it their own. True to his word, no quarter had been shown to those they found, even those who had begged. The fort hadn't been marked on his map, but once again, his intuition had proved right. The pitiful defense signaled to him that the bulk of the Empire's defenses were now concentrated in the capital. Less than 2 miles marched to victory. The only question was, how long could the capital hold out under siege? Gallus would be furious at his delay already, and a 6-month blockade of the Crystal Empire wouldn't do his mood any favors. Fields could be burned and water supplies poisoned, of course, but a city like that would doubtless have reserves to last for months.
General.
One of his lieutenants, whose name he'd never bothered to memorize, landed in front of him and saluted. Morningstar nodded briefly, and the Pegasus relaxed.
We've captured. Kill them. No, sir. We've captured the legate. What?
Morningstar's eyes flared with uncharacteristic surprise.
You're sure?
The lieutenant stood aside, and 2 soldiers dragged a bound form in front of him. Morningstar seized her head in his magic and wrenched it upwards, giving him a better look. As he did, a smile flickered across his face.
Well, Lunar Diamond, what are you doing all the way out here?
Lunar Diamond said nothing, staring at every pony around her with a look of abject hatred. Morningstar's smile vanished as he released the mare.
Not talking. I take it. Then she's useless to us. Take her into my tent and get whatever information you can out of her. Use whatever methods you like. On your orders, General.
The legate's eyes flared with rage. As she was dragged away, she exploded.
You're all a gang of murderers. By Cadenza, I'm ashamed to have called your kind my kin. Every one of you will hang. I'll make sure of.
Her voice was cut off by a hoof smashing into the side of her skull, sending her eyes rolling up into her head and her jaw hanging slack as she was dragged away. Morningstar watched with mild interest, spirits soaring.
Your Highness.
Gloryheart looked up from the negotiation table, internally groaning as another royal guard entered and bowed before her. With some difficulty, she forced out a gracious smile.
Rise, soldier. What news do you have? Your Highness, the equestrians have been spotted in the distance. They are maybe 2 hours' march from our walls. I understand. Send envoys to all remaining fortresses and tell them to route their troops to the capital.
The guard rose, bowed once more, then left. Across the table, Princess Gideon clucked anxiously.
You have great faith in your walls, Princess. I have faith in my legion. I assure you, you are as safe as can be. Shall we resume? Yes. Yes, of course. I believe we are reaching an agreement. If you agree to the terms, as we've drawn them up, I'd be happy to sign right now. I agree. But let's not make haste. We can organize a formal signing ceremony this afternoon. Under the circumstances, I would rather sign now. Well, I'm afraid I must keep you waiting a few more hours.
Florrie Hart rose to her hooved and nodded appreciatively to the assembled griffins.
I must await the arrival of my legate to advise me as to the military situation.
Without warning, the great stained glass window above them shook with a roar as something fell from the skies, and shattered a hole through it. Through the jagged perforation, Florrie was just able to make out the outline of a Pegasus flying away, before her attention was dragged to the object it had deposited, which flew through the air and hit the ground with a gruesome splat, lying motionless on the floor. Tossing her chair aside in shock, Florrie Hart was the first over, and immediately wished she hadn't been, though she had been badly beaten and burned, with chunks of skin and flesh torn off across her body. There was no mistaking the body of her legate Lunar Diamond. Reeling away with a shriek of disgust, Florrie doubled over and vomited, eyes squeezed shut as if hoping she could block out the image before it could burn itself into her memory. Behind her, she could hear the mixed cries of her cabinet at the sight in front of them, and raucous laughter of the griffins at her reaction. Above them all, she could clearly hear the hoarse chuckle of Gideon.
What's the matter, Billy? Reaction like that? I'd think you'd never seen a mutilated corpse drop through a ceiling before.
Florrie shook her head violently, forcing her stomach down and her vision to focus. Swaying slightly on the spot, she forced herself to return to her full height and return to the scene. Her eyes caught sight of a sheet of parchment attached to one of the legate's limbs with blue ribbon. Forcing herself to focus on the parchment, and not the corpse it was attached to, she slipped it free of its grisly binding and unraveled it. There were 3 words printed on it in a dark red liquid she had a sick feeling could only be blood. Gideon's eyes ran over the note, looking utterly bemused.
Well, looks like somebody's in a bad mood. I guess your traps really were as good as you said.
She strutted around the cadaver, examining it with a clinical interest.
My condolences for your loss, but then again, she should have known not to put herself at risk like that.
The parchment slipped from Florrie's grip and fluttered to the ground, leaning slightly as she fought the boiling acid reflux building in her stomach. She took a deep breath and raised her head, doing her best to control her shaking. Losing her cool, rushing herself into a panic and making all the wrong decisions was exactly what Morningstar wanted. Raising her voice, she let out the loudest, booming voice she could muster, addressing the room at large, avoiding every gaze that attempted to catch her attention.
I'm sorry you all had to see this. Princess Gideon, I must ask you and your entourage to leave. I need to call an emergency meeting of my cabinet. My guards will accompany you back to your... Spare me.
Gideon's tone was high, cold, and mocking.
I know a sinking ship when I see one. I have no intention of spending another night here. Let us conclude our business within the hour and we'll be on our way. Otherwise, you can forget our promises and fend for yourself.
Florrie let out a curse under her breath.
Fine. Let us at least move to another room. My legate deserves that dignity. But of course...
Gideon clicked her claw and one of her janissaries stepped forward, taking the thick scroll in her beak.
Lead the way, Princess. You're going to die there, you know. Oh, absolutely. You think these griffins are bad? Those soldiers will eat you whole. Shut up. You hear that, Tyrek? She's going to show us. If you don't shut up, I'm going to shut you up.
Cozy stuffed the last of her few belongings in the saddlebags that laid at the end of her bed and fastened the zip with a fierce motion.
And as soon as I find a way to get rid of both of you, you're gone. I don't care what happens to you after that. In fact, I'm glad that statue was destroyed.
Both apparitions burst into laughter at that, causing Cozy to grimace.
What's with you two? You change your minds about how you're going to treat me every single day, and you aren't even enjoying it. Enjoying it? How could we enjoy this?
Chrysalis shrieked, glaring at the filly with genuine contempt.
We're stuck in your boring little world until you die, which, on your current trajectory, should be a few months. I'll be glad when it's all over. She has a point,
Tyrek grumbled.
Without villages to crush or magic to steal, there doesn't seem much point to life anymore. On the other hand, things look like they're getting more exciting. Don't be so pessimistic.
Cozy heaved her saddlebags onto her bed and climbed under the covers, muttering angrily to herself.
Well, figure it out. It's not my problem.
The camp was little more than a cluster of disparate tents constructed around a series of campfires, which glittered like flaming gemstones in the pitch blackness of the polar night. The walls of the capital were close, any closer, indeed, and they would be vulnerable to ambush. From the flap of his tent, Morning Star gazed upwards at the spires of the Crystal Palace, a stirring in his blood unlike any he had ever known. He'd enjoyed many victories in his past, but nothing compared to this. The glory, the respect, the fame, it was all he had ever wanted. A second magigram laid on the flood, trodden into the blistering snow. Equestrian Ministry of War, top secret. General Morningstar, stop. Respond, stop Griffin forces within marching distance of Canterlot, stop abandon siege. Repeat, abandon siege of Crystal Empire, stop. Failure to respond will be treated as treason. Capital punishment applies, stop. Message conveys personal orders of Regent Gallus, stop. Respond immediately, repeat, respond immediately, stop. It would be a lie to say the contents did not trouble him. They would trouble any pony of sound mind. But to stop now, pack up and return to Equestria? After losing so many troops to traps and holdouts, after encamping the walls of the Crystal Empire? Unthinkable. He was at the throat of the enemy, and he intended to deal a killing blow. The decision to drop the corpse of the legate right on top of the enemy as they entertained foreign delegates had been a brilliant suggestion from one of his lieutenants, though he sorely lamented that the fleeing carriage had escaped their clutches. No, to stop now and return home wasn't an option. His own soldiers would lynch him, and who could blame them? He was tired. In total, he'd been awake nearly 30 hours without rest, and not by choice. Something about this country unnerved him. It wasn't something he'd ever admit, but for the first time in his long and brutal career, he could feel the eyes of conscience watching his back. Not his own, but those of another. He wasn't so superstitious as to entertain fantastic fantasies about eternal judgment, of course, but they did just as good a job at keeping him awake at night. Growling, he kicked a drift of snow over the small fire in front of his tent, extinguishing it before he headed back inside. He needed to be rested for the battle tomorrow. Flurry Heart lay down in her bed with a heart so heavy she feared it might drag her beneath her covers and suffocate her. In the last 3 hours, she had signed a treaty that redefined her nation's relationship with the world, buried not just one of the finest soldiers she had ever had the fortune of knowing, but also one of her dear friends, and appointed a new legate from the small group of officers within her grasp, a young, honest and competent but clearly overwhelmed stallion called Amethyst Shard. From outside her own window, she could see the glittering flames and fluttering black tents of the equestrian army. They were bound to attack tomorrow, and while she was certain they would not seize the castle that soon, she was running on borrowed time. In her ear, a small, vicious voice whispered awful things. You're a coward. You didn't surrender, and now, your entire kingdom is going to die. No, I didn't. I was standing up for yourself. You sided with slavers to save you, filthy coat. You should be ashamed to call yourself a princess. I'd take it back if I could. Then do it. Go, offer yourself up. They're not going to turn back now. You don't know that.
Shut up.
Lori's heart lurched up in her bed and swung at the air before collapsing into a heap and bursting into tears, weeping silently as she felt every doubt and fear she'd ever had wrap themselves around her like tendrils and dig in viciously. The mountain was just as he remembered it. The cave had barely changed in the decades past. A deep, ugly wound on the side of the otherwise beautiful ridges and peaks of the mountain ranges that blanketed much of the north. As he approached, an evil presence rustled his scales and chilled his bones. A fear gripped him, forcing its way into his brain and firing every neuron of his into a scream to run. Pushing through the biting terror, he landed silently in front of the cavern and slithered closer. The powerful enchantments on the cave had never meant to be broken, not even by him, but every incantation had its weak points. As he approached and laid his hand on the first of several magical barriers, a warm buzz ran through the tips of his claw and through his body. The power within would have incapacitated any mortal being, but he merely smiled. As the first barrier fell to pieces beneath his grip, the second dug itself in, and fear morphed into doubt. Doubt he couldn't shake as easily. He knew why he felt this way, but was it the spell, or was he truly making a mistake? Trusting the mare who had laid the body of her lifelong mentor at her hooves without so much as a flicker of remorse? No. That was it. Talking. Focus. Push through. You trust Luster. The second barrier hummed and pulsed angrily, spurring him on. I trust Luster, Dawn. With a flash, the second barrier shattered like glass, tiny shards firing forwards and bouncing off the Draconiquist's thickened skin. As he stepped forwards and felt his blood boil with rage at the mere sight of the third barrier, a small voice in his head let out a small sigh. It was going to be a long night. 7 hours later, as the last hints of the sun broke over the mountainside and lit the cavern with its warm scarlet glow, the final enchanted barrier dissipated into ash that glittered like tiny stars, and landed at the cloven hooves of their master. Dusting himself off dramatically, then pausing sheepishly when he realized there wasn't a soul around to be amused by his antics, Discord treaded slowly into the cavern. There it laid, as eerily spotless as the day it had been forged. Not a blemish, a dent, a spot of rust, save for the deep cracks running along its side that had been on it as long as he had known. A rush of longing entered him, and it took every ounce of what self-control he had left to stop himself from pouncing upon the bell and draining it of its power. Instead, he coughed politely and bowed to the empty room.
A moment of your time, if you'd please. And if I refuse...
The voice was bodiless and ashen, and caused the cave to shake with every syllable, sending dust flying, thick and heavy, into the air. Discord smiled, and slowly rose from his bow.
I'd have to come back some other time. What have you come to see? Peace.
The briefest of pauses was followed by a rumbling of approval that shook the cave with such force, it dislodged 3 stalactites from the ceiling.
Enter, friend.
The humming noise he had become so accustomed to faded. The magic drained from the cave and faded away, and in seconds, the last of the enchantments had left the place, leaving behind nothing more than an empty cavern and a dirty bell. Discord seized the bell in his paw and held it up to his eyeline. Every one of his enchantments had been in place, but a reasonably skilled mage could have restored them with little difficulty. But the final enchantment couldn't have been replaced by any creature other than him. This was the bewitching bell. He was sure of it. It was an ugly thing, hewn of thick pewter and of poor craftsmanship. Even within his grasp, he could feel the magic stolen from 10,000 unicorns screaming to escape. A burning sense of shame filled him as he recalled the days of Groger's reign, and how he had laughed from the skies as darkness had consumed the land. For a moment, he was tempted to smash the bell to pieces against the wall of the cave, to set free the magic so wrongly stolen from those so long ago. But he resisted, instead producing a small purse with a click of his fingers and somehow fitting the entire bell inside. The world needed his help to defeat a new tyrant. There would be time for self-reflection later. Slipping out of the cave's mouth, he beat his wings and took flight once more, headed due west to the Griffin lands. End of chapter.